All right, good evening. It's good to be with you. Start a little bit there. We were just talking about some things. So we just had starting now for a little bit longer than normal, so you had time to check in, which is always good. I just got to check things. All right, that volume's all working. So we didn't have it last week. There were a couple of reasons, actually. It turned out quite well for us. Normally we don't have an evening teaching on a long weekend here. Just gives people a chance if they want to go away, and also I'll say gives me a little bit more of a break with the family leading into that, because unlike most people, when you have a long weekend, people are like, oh, what are you doing for the long weekend? Well, truthfully, I'm a pastor, so I don't really get long weekends. The weekends don't really change for me in that aspect, but last week we ended up having a storm here anyway, so it worked out. The storm hit later in the afternoon. But if you've been coming with us, we've been looking at the book of Daniel. And we call this series Unlocking Daniel. And as I said, I'm not really unlocking anything new. We're just kind of studying Daniel together. I just wanted a catchy title. I never say that I'm going to teach you something brand new. You may learn something new, but that comes from a lot of study that I've done ahead of time. They always say that if you think that you've come up with something new out of the scriptures, be very careful. One, it's probably not new. And two, if it is, well, you're probably off into heresy. So you got to be careful with that in that aspect. But so that we're not really unlocking it. We're studying through Daniel. But remember, the ultimate goal of this is when we're finished the book of Daniel, we're going to head right into the book of Revelation. And the reason we started with Daniel is the book of Revelation, for a lot of people, they think it's quite difficult to understand. And it can be, particularly if you're working with, because it's apocalyptic literature, you're working with the imagery. And since the book of Revelation, I am not a preterist by any means of the definition. If you're not familiar with that word, the preterists hold that the entire book of Revelation has already come to pass and was fulfilled with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And for that, they turn and they have to date the book of Revelation to the 60s, which makes it interesting because therefore it would be one of the earliest books of the New Testament written rather than one of the last one. I hold with more traditional information that the book of Revelation was written around 90, or a little bit after 90 AD, which means it's after the destruction of the temple, which means it hasn't come to pass yet. But so how can we learn to understand the imagery in Revelation? Well, the book of Daniel is written in the same genre. It's written in apocalyptic style. Well, not the first 6 chapters, but the last 6 are. But here's the beautiful part. A good section of Daniel has already come to pass, and we know this because of the history. And so when we study the apocalyptic imagery that has already come to pass, it helps us to be able to look at the book of Revelation. And when we run into literature or imagery that hasn't come to pass, it helps us to extrapolate into the understanding of the new. So that's why we're starting with Daniel. And that's what we're doing. So for tonight, we're going to be jumping into chapter 3 of Daniel. If you want to go there, it's where we're going to be headed. But before we do that, let's just open with a word of prayer. Let's pray together. Oh, Father God, I just thank you to be able to share together, to have your word so readily available to us. And that, Lord, as we look at your word, we see how you are in command of all things, that you're in command of all history. And when our faith is placed in you, what do we have to fear? And so, Lord, tonight as we look at the events that have already taken place and we look at this historical record, I pray that you would grant us understanding, that you would be our teacher, and that ultimately as we learn to trust you more, and may our faith continue to grow. And so, Lord, be glorified in our study tonight. Be glorified in the sharing of your word, and may all things give praise to you. And I give you thanks. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, tonight, I was looking kind of for a title for this one, because this one's a little bit different. I like to give a title for each kind of teaching here. So tonight I'm calling this one Avoiding Corruption. Now let me give you kind of where we are in the events of Daniel's life, because it's quite interesting because Daniel's actually not mentioned in this section. And you can kind of guess why. And I mean that. I don't mean like, hey, let's just make a guess. I mean, you're going to have to guess. Because Daniel's not mentioned. So you're going to go, oh, what was he doing at this point? Truthfully, we don't know. But up until this point that we were at, Daniel has, and the three have come through, have been taken prisoner, gone to Babylon, gone through the schooling, have already shown themselves not willing to compromise when it comes to the eating and drinking of food from the king's table, because they don't want to defile themselves. And then as they graduated, they are shown to be the best of all those coming through the schools. And then the king, Nebuchadnezzar, he has a dream one night, and he knows the dream is something special. He knows that it really means something, and he can't afford to have any yes men tell him what he wants to hear. So he places this challenge on them with dire consequences if they can't do it, to tell him his dream and the meaning. That way he can be sure that they're not just making up a meaning. And when they can't do that, the king orders their execution of all the wise men, determining that they're just set out to look out for themselves. Tell him what he wants to hear, and he doesn't want that. That's not in good service. And so as the orders are being carried out, they come to Daniel, and Daniel asks, why did this happen? He's told what has taken place, and he asks for time. And so Daniel and the three begin prayer and fasting, and the Lord reveals to Daniel the dream. And so Daniel goes to the king, gives praise to the Lord, and tells him what the dream is, tells him about the great statue that he saw. And he talks about the head of gold, and that represented Nebuchadnezzar. And then you've got the breastplate of silver and the legs of bronze, and working his way down, and how this describes the next coming kingdoms. And Nebuchadnezzar, hearing the interpretation, but also knowing that Daniel told him what the dream was, knows that the interpretation is true. And because of that, you run into the spot here. I'm going to touch on this later, but I want to read it. That the king answered, this is chapter 2, verse 47. The king answered Daniel and said, truly your God is the God of gods and Lord of lords, and the revealer of secrets, since you could reveal the secret. Just keep that in mind, what Nebuchadnezzar has said, that your God is the God of gods overall, because that's going to become important tonight. And so Nebuchadnezzar, he then praises Daniel, he rises him up, and Daniel continues to rise to power. So with that, the three friends do. And that leads us into where we're going to talk about tonight. Truthfully, we don't know how much time has passed, but some has happened. But before we do, I always told you that there's one most important item in all of Daniel that I want you to keep in mind above it all, and it's simply the sovereignty of God. I never want us to forget that. And because Daniel is in a situation where he's in a foreign land, he's in a place where they want Daniel to capitulate to them, they want Daniel to compromise on everything, and Daniel refuses to, trusting in God. And even tonight we're going to see the sovereignty of God and what that looks like to trust in the sovereignty of God. But God's sovereignty isn't just over individuals, it's over entire nations, it's over everything. And that was something we've seen from the very beginning. The very first thing that you see is that God handed over the king of Judah to Nebuchadnezzar. And then you see when Daniel's in the schooling, the first thing it says is, and the Lord caused Daniel to receive favor. And then when you run into the dream, it's, and God revealed it to Daniel. Then you run into the king, and Daniel say, the Lord is showing you. So it's sovereignty of God through it all. And the reason I continue to push, as I said, we're going to hit the Revelation. And one of the reasons people stay away from Revelation is like, it sounds scary. We don't want to learn about this. And it's like, it's not so scary when you remember the one who's in charge of it all. When you remember that we have the King of Kings who is sovereign over it all, and nothing is going to catch him by surprise. And so even tonight when we look at this, we keep that in mind, that God is sovereign. Now with that, and all that said, we're going to head over to chapter 3 of Daniel. So let's read starting at verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, you shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a burning fiery furnace." So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, in symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. They spoke and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold image you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego, so they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up? Now if you are ready at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the fire of a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who shall deliver you from my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If there is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up." We're going to stop reading there for now. So, we're going to back up here and discuss what exactly is going on. And the first question that most people kind of want to answer, want to ask, and this kind of thing is, why did Nebuchadnezzar set up this thing anyway? The other question that's often there is, what was the image? We're just told that he set up this golden image. Some want to hold that the reason and what the statue is are one and the same. In other words, that Nebuchadnezzar took the message that God had given him in the dream, that he is the head of gold, and then therefore created a statue of himself made of gold for everybody to worship. That answer is probably half right. I think it's half right, not completely. But let's unpack that a little bit. First, I want us to understand the gold statue. The gold image here, this is probably not made of 100% gold. What I mean by that, just look at the sheer size of this thing. If you look at the size of it, they calculate that there probably wasn't even that much gold in Babylon for it. So, do we go that the Bible's wrong, saying it's a statue of gold, or is the Bible exaggerating the size of it? Well, probably neither. There's no reason to expect that. This is probably about the same as what happens if you try to buy a gold piece of jewelry on Amazon, the odds are you're not getting something that's pure gold. You're getting something that is gold plated, so it's covered in gold, and therefore it gets classified as gold. Now the underneath can oftentimes, it can be nickel. It can, most times though, if you spend a little bit more, you'll get silver. So you get silver plated with gold. Why? Because most people aren't going to pay for something that's 100% gold for jewelry anymore. Some do, but I'll tell you this, that when you buy something, I bought my wife a pair of earrings a couple of years ago for Christmas that were 100% gold, and that was within like the hundreds of dollars. And then the next time I purchased something that was gold, I looked at it and it's silver covered in gold, and I'll tell you, it looks very similar, and it was a lot cheaper. Now I had to be careful on that because my wife is allergic to nickel, so I can't buy nickel jewelry as it causes irritation. But silver's fine. So if I buy her silver jewelry, I gotta make sure it's 100% silver. So here what you end up with is probably Nebuchadnezzar's made this statue and it's covered in gold. So by all definitions, it's a statue of gold. This is like saying that the gates of the temple that Solomon built were gold. Well, actually, they're not gold. They were wood, covered in gold. And that's significant because during the siege, we have documents of this, when they put the fires to the gate, they were having a hard time getting through the gate until the gold melted. Once the gold melted, they were easily able to burn the doors. And then they took the gold. Now, what is the statue of here? Well, it's probably not a statue of Nebuchadnezzar. It was probably a statue of the god Nebu, and who looks like this. That's the actual statue of Nebu, a much smaller version of that than what Nebuchadnezzar made. But Nebu is one of the chief Babylonian gods, and particularly the one that Nebuchadnezzar would serve. And there's a reason for that. Why do we think that he made a statue of Nebu? What is his name? Not him, the king's name. Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar was named after Nebu. Remember when we talked about the names of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah being changed? The most prominent one there is Abed-nego, which they changed his name from being after God to being after who is like Nebu. And that's what they were doing. So it's more likely what has happened here is Nebuchadnezzar has set up this deity that he wants them to bow down to. Now, make no mistake, there's something else going on here, because this is not just about homage to the king. Because if you pay attention, Daniel has no problem. The three have no problem giving honor to Nebuchadnezzar. Oftentimes, you'll get the explanation, "O king, live forever." It is what's also interesting, is a side here, about the events of the book of Esther. If you actually look at it and you saw it from an outward perspective, the antagonist that sets everything off is Mordecai. You go, wait a minute, Mordecai is the good guy. Pay attention. Haman gets promoted by the king. Why? We're not told. He just gets promoted by the king. He comes out and everybody's paying him homage. Who's not paying him homage? Mordecai. Why? Don't know. He just refuses to do it. Mordecai has no problem giving honor to the king, but for some reason he will not give honor to Haman. More likely because he's an Amalekite. It's what it is. He's a descendant from Amalek. The Amalekites in Israel were mortal enemies. So he refuses to bow down to him, which then sets off the events of the book of Esther. Like I said, I take the book of Esther a little different than them. Book of Esther is the only book in the Bible that doesn't mention God. And you go, okay, then what's the point of the book of Esther? That's always a question. Some are like, oh, they want to give a reason for the Feast of Purim. It's like maybe, but I think it's more simple than that. It's just the fact about the faithfulness of God. That God is faithful even when his people aren't acting faithful. God's still faithful to his promises. So here, there'd be no problem for them to bow down and give honor to the king. Come in, bow to the king, and show him honor. But there's something else going on here. The image, as I said, it's probably not an image of Nebuchadnezzar. It's an image of Nebu, the god Nebu. And Nebuchadnezzar's full name. Did I put that here? I didn't put it here. Means, here it is, on this one. Means Nebu, protect your servant. That's what Nebuchadnezzar's name actually means. So he is named after this god. So to come in and to bow down to this statue, what are you actually doing? You're offering, saying, protect the king. So somebody who wouldn't want the king to be protected, they're not going to bow down. So, and what you're going to look here is you've got two different perspectives on these sides. You've got the cultural perspective here, which is why the people have no problem with that culture bowing down to the statue. Yet, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah will not, because there's something else going on. As I come back to that, the question I want to ask, this is why I said I wanted you to remember this. From 247, what does Nebuchadnezzar proclaim? Truly your God is the God of gods. So, but then what does he turn and do and make a statue of? Nebu. He's raising up Nebu, not the God of gods. So how would that be? So Nebuchadnezzar is an interesting fella. And we'll as we continue to look at him. But he went from, I'm going to praise God, your God is the God of gods, so I'm going to turn around and I'm going to set up an idol of a lesser god. Why would you do that? Well, there's two explanations of this. One, Nebuchadnezzar has no problem with polytheism. He's got no problem worshiping multiple gods at the same time. Now, sure, he'll give honor to the God of gods, but his patron god is Nebu. The other thing that can happen is he did seem to take this idea that, he's the head of gold, so I'm going to build a statue of the God who's been watching over me in his mind and make everyone bow down to it. Why? Because it's already acknowledged that if they're saying, I'm the head of gold, well, he also meant that my God is the head of gold here, kind of thing. Now, obviously, that's a little bit of speculation. I can't tell you exactly what was in Nebuchadnezzar's head. We're not told. We're just told that he did this. But what is going on here, and this is what's so important to note, is where is it in here that Nebuchadnezzar makes the command that you have to give up your own personal beliefs and worship Nebu?
Isn't the idea of worship singular?
Not in their culture, it's not. That's the thing. You would think that's because that's how we are. That's our line of thinking. You worship God or you're worshiping someone else. They don't have that problem. You can worship your God, but you also have to worship our God. You have to be a good functioning member of our society. Our culture is not that far from that. Think about what is now. Whether they like it or not, the laws that are being passed in North America, most of the first world countries, are all based on a philosophical leaning of understanding. Anything from matters of life and death, matters of morality, they're all from a philosophical leaning. Take a look at the number one argument that they use to say that Donald Trump is stripping away the rights of women. Now, I'm just using it as an example. I don't agree with everything Donald Trump's done. But on this particular issue, why are they claiming that he's stripping away all the rights of women? Because they're saying he's taken away their right to choose to an abortion. Now, let's call it what it really is. He's taking away their right to kill their unborn child or murder their unborn child. That's what he's doing. Has he taken away any of the rights? Is he saying women are no longer going to vote? Are women no longer in the workforce? Are women no, he's not. It's just this one particular thing. But what does it come to? It comes from the philosophical argument that the child that is within the woman is not a person. Like I said, Canada is very similar in this aspect. They're saying, you go back, 20, 30 years in Canadian politics, MPs were normally, they used to be allowed to vote their conscience. Now they're not. Now you have to toe the party line. If you don't toe the party line, we're going to kick you out. What are they saying? Same thing that they're saying here in Nebuchadnezzar. You can have your personal beliefs, but in public, you ascribe to our philosophy. That's what it's saying. So what do these three know? They're like, we can't bow down, but from everybody else's perspective is, they're not being good citizens. They're not playing along. They're rocking the boat, is what they are doing. And so what has happened here is you've got this image set up which represents the god Nebu, and from society's perspective, they're like, I will bow down and give honor to Nebu because that is doing my civil duty and giving and showing my honor to the king. And that's the connection that they've made. And the reason I say that is if you look at the idea here that it's more than just worshiping this idol. When you look at the complaint that the Chaldeans bring, I'm going to talk about them in a second here. It's, look what it says. Therefore at the time certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. Obviously it's not meaning all the Jews, it's talking about these three in particular. It says, O king, I'm going all the way down here to verse 12. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. See? They attributed worshiping this, bowing down to this idol, to be honor to the king. How? They do not worship, they do not serve your gods or worship the gold image. Notice they separate those two things. Why wouldn't they just say they do not worship the god and image? They've actually separated the two. They don't worship your gods, and they don't bow down to they don't worship your image, the image you set up. They've separated the two. So therefore, it's like, it's enough for them not to accept the gods. They can have their own religious beliefs, but in the public sphere, these are public officials. They need to be bowing down to the higher order in this aspect. They've got to go along with the culture. They've got to get on board. That's what's going on here. And so you've got some interesting things going on here. So now I'm going to take a little break where you can kind of process that. I want to talk about something that's on here a little bit. Dating here. A dating issue. This is what I always like to bring up, the dating issues, because there's always two facets of dating the book of Daniel. Remember, I told you from the very beginning that there's those who want to date it to the 2nd century during the Maccabean War, and trying to say that therefore everything that was written as prophecy after the fact. And then the other dating is that it was written during the 5th century, during the time of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, King Cyrus, Darius, and all that. Well, here's another evidence for the earlier dating. The names that are given here. Now, when I say names, I mean the positions. It talks about administrators, governors, counselors, treasurers, judges, magistrates. All of these words would be from, they're classified as Iranian origin or Persian origin, that kind of area. And here's the thing. All those terms were obsolete during the Maccabean period. In other words, they weren't even in circulation. Most people wouldn't even know them, kind of thing. This would be similar to be picking up the original King James Bible. I don't mean the one we have today. I'm talking about the 1611 King James Bible. Sitting down and reading it and then not understanding what half the words mean. You're going, wait a minute. I remember I was talking to a person who owned a Christian bookstore. And he said he had an interesting time where the person convinced that I want the original King James Bible. So here he goes, like, here you go. And they gave him the King James Bible. I'm like, no, I want the originals. What do you mean? It's like, I want the absolute original. I want a copy of the absolute original. He goes, okay, can you please give me some time? It's going to be a little rough to get that. They said, okay, no problem. He got it in, sat it before, and called them when it came in. He said, here you go. And they said, what is this? I can't read this. I wanted the original. I wanted the English. He's like, that is a copy of the original. They couldn't read it because the words were so foreign. They were out of date. And for somebody who were writing from the 2nd century, the odds of them using these words just randomly in this spot are almost negligible. And so, but it does make sense if somebody had been writing it during the time of the Medo-Persian Empire, which makes sense if Daniel compiled the events at that time. And so you get this dating method here a little bit, that these use of these words only really makes sense if it was during that time. One of the funny things that I also find is as much as I like Lord of the Rings, if you pick up the actual books, they're placed in there and go, okay, what does that word mean? Because he's using Old English in places. It's just like, these words are strange. So, and we run into that because words change their meaning all the time. Just look at the 1960s of Flintstones, their theme song. Look at the Deck the Halls, the words that are used in there. And then in both of those situations, the Flintstones says, we'll have a gay old time. Deck the halls, don me now our gay apparel. Now, if you were to make that phrase today and said, now I'm going to don my gay apparel, that's going to mean something very different than it meant when the song was written. And so you wouldn't use it. If you rewrote Deck the Halls for modern, you'd probably say, now we don our joyous apparel, which means just celebration rather than what it's come to mean. And so it's kind of a dating thing here that, again, affirms the earlier dating rather than the later. Now, there's something also that's interesting about this text. When you're in school and that things, and you're in a class, how do you note if something the professor or teacher says is important? Well, you can generally go by how many times did they repeat it. If they repeat something multiple times, you probably want to take note of it and put it on, and it's going to show up somewhere. Did you notice how many times it said the exact same decree? Why say it over and over again? Why not just say, when they hear, we would just write nowadays, when they heard the music, they didn't bow down. You write the decree the first time and then go on. You got to remember, they didn't have the writing utensils that we did. On a computer, I can just go copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. Even now, if I want paper, and I got some here, I'll go downstairs and I've got, there's what, 4,500 pieces of paper down there that I can grab? Yeah, not so for Daniel. Daniel can't go, oh, more of this. So he didn't write it just for the sake, hey, I need a word count here for my professor to match my word count to make my 1,500 count. He copied it multiple times. You remember, a lot of it, when they would read this, it'd be oral. So they're reading it, and the reason he does it multiple times is because he wants you to recognize the decree. Why is that so important? From the Chaldeans. Now I'm going to mention the Chaldeans here. The Chaldeans here, I'm going to tell you, are not the same usage of the word Chaldeans before in the book. Just the same way that it's using the term Jews. Just the same way that the book of John uses the word Jews. In the book of John, in the gospel that John wrote, he often talks that the Jews opposed Jesus. Did that mean all the Jews opposed Jesus? If they did, then the disciples must have opposed Jesus. No, they were used as a representation of the opposition to Jesus. What you get here for Chaldeans, the Chaldeans aren't the only group. If you remember earlier, it lists all the groups. So here it's just using Chaldeans as a title of those who are loyal to the king. So keep that in mind. It's not using them as the astrologers from before. Like I said, if you look back in chapter 2, it talks about the king gave the command to the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans. How it lists all those. In this case, the Chaldeans represents everybody that is loyal to the king. So most likely the other leaders who are vying for positions of power and they don't like competition, that's who they are. Now, how do we know they're so loyal to the king? Well, look, when they come to the king, they repeat the decree word for word. Why wouldn't you just record, "O king, you've got you got these Jews who refuse to obey your decree"? Like, no. They're going to tell the king exactly the decree. You told them this. You said this. These instruments, this. That they need to bow down and worship, and whoever doesn't should be thrown into the furnace. And then he drives it home. There are certain Jews whom you've set up over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego. These men, now notice they don't just say didn't worship you. They're saying they're troublemakers. O king, they've not paid due regard to you. What evidence do they have of that? Odds are, since they were with Daniel, they probably do pay homage to the king. Now, it is true they do not serve your gods, and it's true they don't worship your image. But they make the appeal that, king, they're not good citizens. They're against you, O king. They refuse to bow down, which ultimately is against you. And the reason I want to show this is because although this happened then, this is the same thing that's happening now. And it is something that's going to happen again. And what do I mean by that? One of the things we'll talk about when we get to the book of Revelation is what is classified as the mark of the beast. And people go, what is the mark? How would people accept that? And I think we've actually had a great explanation of what that will look like in terms just a couple of years ago. During the time of the pandemic, when COVID was running rampant, to try to stop it, they implemented the shot. I'm still not sure which words get censored on media. And what did they bring in with it? Papers, the passport. And people said, it's like, well, we are choosing bodily autonomy, which is supposed to be in our society. We don't want this. And but you're making it so we can't work, we can't go out, we can't do anything. Do you know what the response from the other side was to those who would not conform? You're making the choice not to be good members of society. And since you're not being good members of society, you deserve to be cut off. Put that in connection when the mark of the beast comes in, and what it comes down to worship an image, accept the mark. You don't worship this, you don't bow down, you are not good members of our society, so you're losing the right to buy and sell. You can't integrate in our society. There's nothing new under the sun. This is exactly what's happening here. You want to be working in the kingdom? You want to prove that you're loyal? You want to prove you're good citizens? You can keep your personal beliefs, whatever they are, but you must accept this. You bow down and worship it. You just bow down, pay honor to it, and you do that, and you're fine. Again, this was another example of this is in the Roman Empire. The Christians wouldn't do this one either. That to participate in the marketplace, you would have to come down and bow down to the image of Caesar and say, Caesar is Lord. And with that, you would get a paper that would dictate, I've done my civil duty and now I can buy and sell. Sound familiar to Revelation? It's exactly what the imagery is. This is what's taking place here. And so when a society has gotten away from God, and they'll say, we're a pluralistic society. And remember, Babylon was. Babylon was not a society where everybody was Babylonian. what would he do? He would go in, and every time they would conquer, they would take the best and the brightest and bring them in. And they didn't even have to give up their beliefs, as long as they showed the respect that they were supposed to. As long as they bowed down to the king, gave him honor. Here you just got a step further. The king put up this statue to Nebu that represents his name. Nebu, protect your servant. And so when you bow down to this statue, you're asking to protect the servant. And what you have here is a group of people representing those loyal to the king have no problem pointing out those who don't. They're saying, look, here's a group, here's these that they don't. Now, if you look, there's only 3 there, and there's always the question, where is Daniel? And as I said, you can guess. It's perfectly possible that Daniel is out of town. He's moved up through the rankings, and he's somewhere else, and therefore, hey, he's not in town. Then there's the possibility that he is in town. But Daniel is now very prominent. And Nebuchadnezzar gives Daniel extra leeway. That Daniel, you don't have to worry about this. You got to remember, the other 3 are not as high ranking as Daniel. So they may not get the same latitude. And so Daniel is exempt from it because he's already proven that he's loyal to the king. And Nebuchadnezzar has said, Daniel, your God is the God of gods. So he's not going to mess with Daniel. There's plenty of explanations, but the focus here is on these 3. And they refuse to bow down. And so what do they ultimately do? They stand firm, and they cannot mix idols and God. They know that it's going to cost them. They know that it's out there. They didn't hide this. They didn't say, hey, look, if you bow down, there's going to be consequences. They didn't go, okay, I wonder what the consequences are going to be. They knew the decree from the very beginning of it. The decree says, when you hear it, whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. So here you've got 2 groups of people. If Nebuchadnezzar is putting this decree out, that means there's going to be people who bow down because they believe it. And there's going to be people who bow down because, well, I don't want the fear. I don't want the furnace. I'm going to bow down so I can live. Who cares? I don't really mean it. I'll just bow down. But then you got these 3 who are like, we hear that. We see that. We cannot bow down. He's like, they may be saying, hey, I don't have to give up my belief in the true God. But still, you're asking me to dishonor that God by bowing down to another. He's like, I will not worship this. You got to remember, they're monotheistic. There is no other God. And like, I'm not going to bow down to it. They knew that they could not compromise, no matter what. The thing is, where did we hear that before? Well, way back when they were in school. Here come the foods from the tables. It's like, we can't eat this. Why? Because we know that's been sacrificed to Nebu. We cannot partake of it. Because that would be, to us, that would be the same as if we're acknowledging and worshiping Nebu because we're partaking in your worship. Here's the step further. Since they've already decided we will not dishonor God, we still will not. We cannot bow down. We cannot honor it, no matter what. They cannot mix idols and God. And whether you like it or not, our society is very similar to this, where they're pushing this idea of getting you to mix idols and God. They're getting you to accept ideologies and say, you can have your personal beliefs, but this is the way it is. If you don't think about any time that a Christian runs for any political office. And then what do they always say? Keep your religion at home, out of the public sphere. And that's what they continue to say. The Christian, you can do whatever you want. You keep your religion out of the workforce. The other thing that you're now being pressed into, we live in a pluralistic society. So Christians, you have to accept the other worship as valid. You've got to accept the Muslim religion is just as valid as yours. You have to accept that Satanism is just as valid as yours. Now, they generally don't call that Satanism. I'm going to use the other term. I'll use the Luciferianism. Satanism and Luciferianism are actually different. Satanism is, they'll tell you, is complete, just opposite of God, the rejection of the church and all that. And Satanism is the free will to do whatever you want. Luciferianism is different in saying that Lucifer, bearing the name Lightbringer, he's actually the good God, and Yahweh is the wicked God. Yahweh wants to enslave us, and Lucifer come in and gave us freedom, kind of thing. That's the main difference between Satanism and Luciferianism. And so they push this on the Christians. You've got to accept all this. And you've got to accept it as valid. This is one of my, like I said, my biggest problem when churches accept the full documentation of the Truth and Reconciliation Act. Now, I'm not against Truth and Reconciliation. I'm just talking about the ones particular to the church. There are 4 articles that relate specifically to the church. But in there, it means that if the church wants to reconcile, it has to acknowledge that native spirituality is just as valid as the Christian faith. That's what they want. And this is why you also run into, you can have your beliefs, but don't push them on us. Don't evangelize. Yet the Christian faith is called exactly to do that. And so you've got this conformity. And as I said, I talked in our previous series, one of the greatest issues that is arriving in the church today and amongst Christians is this idea of syncretism. To trying to sync the beliefs of the culture into the beliefs of Christianity. And they're being told to do this. They're being told, just bow down and worship to this idol that shows you to the king. And they're like, we cannot do that. And I want us to note here, and I think one of the things that we run into, and why I want to take note of this, is because we're after the event, we know the outcome. We know that, yes, they get put into the furnace. But what do we also know? That they walk out again. But look at what they actually say here in this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, for he says, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Now, this wasn't them being disrespectful. They're not saying, I don't know you any explanation. They're really saying, we don't even need to talk about this. Just look at our record. We're proven loyal to you. That accusation that we're not loyal to you at all, that we don't pay you any regard, just look at our record. It's completely false. It's like, so that's not the case. So this has nothing to do with Nebuchadnezzar, that we're against you. The reason we're not bowing down isn't that we're wishing that you die. Nothing like that. We're not trying to create some revolt or anything like that. He says it has to do with worship. It's like, if this is the case, that we're going to be, if we don't bow down, we're going to be thrown into the furnace, I want you to know that our God whom we serve, he is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king. If they stopped there, we would just be like, yeah, they're just typical, I'll call them biblical characters who they know God's going to step in, so what do they have to worry about? You know what I mean? It's kind of like the Apostle Paul on the shipwreck. If you're not familiar with that, they crash around the island of Malta. But like they're in the midst of a storm and all this, and everybody's nervous, and Paul just stands up and is like, men, don't be afraid. The God whom I serve came to me the last night telling me that we're all going to be saved. If you know that's the outcome, no matter what happens, you just go, I know that I'm going to be saved. And if that's what the knowledge that they had was, okay. But that just is like, sure. But look at what they do say. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Notice that they even go to the point, it's like, even if we're not rescued, Even if we're persecuted, even if everything comes down on us, we refuse to abandon God. As I said, look at their defense here. Notice again, as I said, the first thing that they talk about, we have no reason to defend ourselves on this matter. No reason to answer. They're only talking about that first line, that they pay you no homage. They do answer the other two charges, and they're like, you're right. I don't. We won't serve your gods. That's never been hidden. From the very beginning, we've made that clear. We will not serve your gods. And with that, we will not worship the gold image you have set up. I always said when we are faced with a situation where we're called to compromise in, don't wait until we're in that situation. Figure out where our line in the sand is first. They had already decided that when they ran into the issue with the food. And that carried on. They were able to withstand this because they had already decided, you know what? We will not defile or sin against our God. We refuse to. And therefore, even when they're faced with this, even if they die, they said, we will not go against our God. And by this point, yes, they do have some idea of the afterlife. They have an idea of an afterlife and that they will be with him. They're like, no, we're not going to deny it. That's the issue of faith. And so it's one of those things, as I said, oftentimes when we talk about the heroes of faith, this is where Hebrews 11 is so interesting, that we talk about the heroes of the Old Testament. We talk about like David overcoming Goliath, the Israelites going through, Moses going through the Red Sea. We talk about these three going through the furnace. And we love that aspect. But when you read the last bit of chapter 11 of Hebrews, it's not talking about people who are delivered. It's talking about people who are persecuted, thrown in jail, sawn in two, ripped apart, burned alive. It's like, and they're in the great cloud of witnesses. And so when we look at the future and we know what is coming, and we see, as I said, there's nothing new under the sun. Our society is very similar to this. And they're getting to the point where you will bow down and you will worship our ideology. You can keep your personal things to yourself, but you're going to have to acknowledge this in public, and it's how you're going to have to live. Or else you're going to face the hardship. The Christian needs to have the same faith as these three. And say, you know what? God can provide this. God can look after me. God can deliver. But even if he doesn't, I'm not going to give in. I'm still going to trust him in it all. And that's the response before the king. Next week we'll come back and deal with the rest of this chapter. We'll talk about their deliverance, what's going on there. But in all of this, as I said, it ultimately brings us, when you look at the book of Revelation, and in all of that, and since I'm drawing this to the aspect of the mark of the beast, at the end of this, when the beast and the false prophet, they've done all these miracles and all that, it says that in a part, they declared war on the saints and conquered them. In other words, they were slaughtering them, they were doing whatever they wanted with them. And they've asked a question at the end of that section. It's like, who is like the beast and who can overcome him? The very next section, it talks about a great multitude in heaven. And what does it talk about them? They have overcome the beast. How? By the word of their testimony and the blood of the Lamb. In other words, although their lives may have been taken from them, they weren't dead. They were very much alive. And they were still victorious through Christ. And so that's where we ultimately get to. So with that, I'll give a chance for discussion, insight, questions. And anyone like to ask, insight, that kind of thing. All right. They're all pretty quiet in here. We'll hoop and holler later. But, all right. Well, until next time then, as always, like to bring up just what's happening this week for those who like to know what's happening. Coming up this week is a pretty standard week in our programs. We've got our Tuesday night kids club happening 6:30. That's ages 3 to 10. You got a Wednesday night small group starting at 7 o'clock this week. Thursday night Bible study here at the church with Paul going through the book of John. And then Friday night teen youth group, 6:30. That's grades 6 and up, well into college and career. If you'd like to come on out. That's all happening this week. I had something else and then I forgot it. That's okay. It's not that important right now. Yes, now I remember what it was. One thing that I've noted, and I just realized this morning, just something to keep note of. Two things here. One, if you catch our morning services online on Facebook, you'll notice that they're all backwards. And what I mean by that, they're mirrored. And the reason for that is Facebook, which I used to stream the morning services, they removed all their filters from their live video. And apparently the ability to mirror the image was a filter, and so that's gone. So that's why that is. The other thing about that, when I looked this morning to post the morning teaching, they only give an option now that it's going to be deleted after 30 days. In other words, there's no keep permanently anymore. And they just give a note, delete it after 30 days. If you want to keep it, download it, kind of thing. Now, with that being said, for the last little while, all of these teachings, both morning and evening, have made it onto YouTube. And so on YouTube, before it goes on there, the morning service, I run it through my filter programs and flip it, so it's forward for those who like it forward. And two, they're all going to be there. They're not deleted after 30 days. So I don't know what's going to happen to videos that are already on Facebook from us for the last 8-ish years, maybe. It might not be quite that, it might be 6 years. They may suddenly start to disappear. I don't know because it's on their platform, and I imagine you got to think how many people use that platform and how much data that video is going to take up after a while. They're probably cleaning up space is what they're doing. So if you'd like to catch those serious kind of things, I'll tell you now, if you want to go back through all those, I would go through and download those now when you get a chance. Or, like I said, you can head over to YouTube, and all the videos from the teaching, they usually go on Sunday night after we're done here. I usually get them done Sunday evening, and they're there, so you can catch them there. Just that note. And for those who are on our email list, I'll probably just reiterate that in my weekly email this week. That goes out usually on Wednesdays. So until then, though, until next time, as always, I do pray that the Lord bless you and keep you. May you know that He is always with you. And may you too stand firm and refuse to mix the worship of idols into the worship of the true and living God, knowing that it is only through Him and through His victory that we achieve victory. Blessings with you until next time.